Hey there, it's Matt here from SSW TV. I'm at NDC Sydney with Ben Dechrai, and we've been talking coding and deployments.
Right.
Yeah, Ben, how are you going?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Yeah, not bad, not bad.
I could do with some more sleep.
Couldn't we all?
Always the way at a conference.
Couldn't we all? When I join like a new project, or there's an existing project, I'm joining their team.
Yeah.
One of the first things I look at is when was the last time they deployed to production?
Right.
That's kind of a metric that's important to me. It shows that they're not sitting on all that deployment debt.
Mm-hmm.
What's the first thing that you look at when you join a project?
I guess similarly, I'd probably actually look at what is in deployment and how does that differ to what we have in the main branch or the code repository that we're looking at. It's probably, for me personally, it's less important how long that time's been, because nothing might have changed, in which case we're fine.
Fair enough.
But if,
How much
forbid
data are they sitting on?
edits code in production.
Yeah.
But what if environment variables have been modified? What if somebody went in and scaled something in the platform service to provide more resources to a certain area of the application? That kind of stuff. If that's done and never brought back into the local configuration or the documentation, that's something that I'm now not aware of.
If it's not captured in infrastructure as code, or if it's not documented in like a Word doc or at least Markdown file or something like that.
Even if the code hasn't changed at all, next time I push something through, it might not actually be the same as what's currently in production, which ideally it should be.
Definitely. If they are sitting on like a bunch of deployment debt, my gut feel is you want to get that out as soon as possible.
Totally.
But as you were just saying, there may be some risks in doing that. What sort of measures would you take to try and mitigate that?
To bring all that back in, like if I'm using infrastructure as code, I'd look at, I know there's probably some kind of tooling that the platform that you're using has to pull that out through maybe an API call, or maybe you've got to actually dig in and look at the user interface, the admin interface for those, and see if anything's changed. It's a bit of a nightmare to do it that way. But just do an audit, basically. Like, what is the actual difference between production and what would be deployed if I deployed my current main using whatever process has been documented or automated through infrastructure as code.
Awesome.
And then just bring that back in, make sure the main is kept up to date.
Get it.
And that then becomes an ongoing problem, right? You're going to have to keep doing that all the time. If there's an issue, if you discover an issue when you go into the new project, then the likelihood is that'll reappear in a month, 6 months, 12 months' time. So you have to have a process in place to make sure that either doesn't happen again, or at least you have a process to repetitively mitigate that issue.
Okay. So you may not be deploying that frequently. It's one of those things that just sits there and runs. It doesn't.
Well, again, if you're deploying and you've got certain configuration set up to have the application at a certain scale, and you've got a script in the background that goes, hey, we actually need more resource, and it makes modifications as opposed to a human going in and making configuration changes.
So how would you
then
pull that back?
I mean, logging would be nice, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
One of the core tenets of DevOps is logging and monitoring and observability of what's actually going on in the system. So bring that back as an alert, or you could even write a script that automatically detects, or like a webhook or something that detects that and then updates your infrastructure as code in real time. But that becomes a little bit Inception-like.
Yeah, I'd hope that.
I don't think that's a great idea, but you could play with that kind of thing.
Well,
bit of fun.
I'd kind of hope that you're capturing some of the auto-scaling features in the infrastructure as code, in which case it'll move up and down as it needs. We've captured the min-max boundaries in our...
That's a good point. And if it's either a well-maintained project that has that auto-scaling built in already, or it's a relatively new project where that would be hopefully the default way of setting it up in the first place, then that's hopefully what you would experience when you join a new project. But sometimes you join a project and the code base is 10 years old, and it's still in production, and it still works fine.
Yep.
But it's based on 10-year-old architectural thought, the way that it was done a while before perhaps auto-scaling was something you would have thought about adding into the project. Maybe that's something that, and you do find that with projects that grow over time, rather than taking the time to re-architect and not necessarily rewrite, but to make sure that you're still following best practices and to almost bolt on extra bits of functionality or use new advantages of the tools that we have nowadays. You can often get into this really messy place of you don't really know what's going on without actually pushing something through and seeing what the effect is. And sometimes that won't result in auto-scaling because that's not something that was configured back in the time.
Yeah, definitely. So that's kind of the infrastructure side of things. If it's something that hasn't been touched in 10 years, it's going to be old code. So what about, like from a code point of view?
Sure.
One of the terms that gets thrown around is clean code.
Right.
That's kind of I get a bit of a twitch. 'Cause
a lot of people do.
Yeah.
Even I get it. I mean, it's one of, I work at Sonar, and it's one of the things that we talk about is clean code.
Yeah.
But even I sometimes feel like, what is clean code? Is that something?
Does that mean
it
there's
mean the right
unclean
thing?
code?
Exactly.
Yeah.
How we were talking before about Schrödinger's cat. The cat is either dead or alive, and you don't know until you look. So, is code clean or dirty until you look at it? I could write the worst piece of code in the world, but if nobody ever looks at it again, does it matter? As long as it does what it's meant to do.
Yes.
It passes the functional tests and the unit tests and all of those kind of things. It might not pass the code quality test, but at that point, who actually cares?
Yeah, so there's kind of that trade-off between the code may be yuck to read. It may not run great, but it's not worth updating it.
Sure.
Because it does what it needs to do.
Yeah.
And you're not going to get ROI on, like return on investment on that effort.
And this is something a lot of people that I've spoken to have thought about in terms of what is clean code. It's an all or nothing thing, but I don't believe that it is. Especially if you inherit a very large code base and it's had 20, 50, 100 developers work on it, each of them for different periods of the lifetime of that project. You're going to get different ways of implementing things. You're going to get some people have implemented using certain best practices at the time, which then would have changed, but the old code isn't updated, so it doesn't use the new best practices in terms of maybe class hierarchy or I don't know, whatever it is that you're using currently won't match the code that you had before, but it still works. So, but if it still works, then if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The issue that I see that comes up, and I worked on a project for a large online retailer about 10 years ago or so, and I was brought in to head up a team who would maintain the existing code base while the in-house team who wanted the Fun Greenfields project rewrote the application from scratch. So we had this maintenance project that also, there was still feature requests coming through daily, so we had to manage and maintain that software and keep it updated without it really falling through the cracks, because it was based on very old technology and design decisions, and it wasn't the most stable, held together with a bit of string, I guess. But we would still need to make changes to that code. But if there was any code that was working and didn't need to be changed because it was not part of whatever feature or bug we were addressing, then we just wouldn't touch it.
Okay.
As long as it works and it does its job. If it doesn't, then obviously you've got to dive into this piece of code that's a bit of a headache to parse through. And what I would recommend at that point is to clean that code first, whatever that clean code methodology means for you. But clean it first so you understand what's going on, and the next person who looks at it is going to more easily be able to pick up what's going on. But clean it so it does exactly what it did before, even if it was wrong, so that at least you know now you're in a starting position, all the tests are still passing, you're in a starting position, okay, but I now know what's going on, then you can change the tests and change the code to address the feature or to fix the bug. But then you're only cleaning what you're actually touching. And I think there was a statistic I saw a few months ago that the average software project, as you touch the code over time, as you're fixing things and adding new features, over 5 years, I can't remember the exact statistic, but I think over a 5-year period, you replace over 2/3 of your code. So if you only fix the code you're touching, in 5 years' time, you're going to have a predominantly clean code base.
What's the ship? There's the ship where you replace all the parts on the ship. Is it still the same ship?
Right.
I forget the name of that one.
Yeah, I can't remember either.
But look it up.
Same kind of thing. Software still does it does more than what it did before, because new features, bugs are fixed. But then imagine you coming into that project 5 years down the track and looking at that code base instead. It's a much nicer situation to be in.
So what sort of, do you have any tips in terms of, it seemed like you were alluding to like red-green refactor when you pick some stuff up to clean it up, then you add in the functionality because it's a bit of a nicer place to start off with.
Yeah.
Are there any other tips or things to look out for when doing this type of stuff?
In terms of how to clean things up, how to make it...
Yep.
Yeah,
things to look for?
Sure. So Sonar came up with this concept of cognitive complexity.
Okay.
Rather than looking at one of the common-ish types of complexities, I guess, is cyclomatic complexity. How often do things get run and like diving into the actual flow of the way the interpreter or the compiler actually looks at the code. But cognitive complexity is more around how people analyze the code. And it scores code based on how often do you nest things within one function, how often does something get run within that, so that like the flatter you can create your code, the more you can make your code like a story rather than a choose-your-own adventure, like a kid's story instead of a... The analogy's failing. The analogy's failing because of my vocabulary. But a simple top-to-bottom story, as opposed to choose-your-own adventure, where you've got
run, spot, run.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if you can make each functional unit of code, whether that's a function or whatever you want to, however you want to break out these bits of code, if you can make that something you can read top to bottom and not be confused, and keep that mental stack of where you are in this adventure to a minimum, it means that anybody can come into the code and quite readily pick up what's going on.
Yeah, that sounds like it aligns a lot with like ubiquitous language. So you want to be talking the same terms as the business people.
Right.
In the same way you'd want the code to read like how you'd write down the business logic.
And the thing is, you can almost do that and still have a higher cognitive complexity.
Yeah.
Because you might have an if statement that checks 3 different things, and each line, each test will then run on to the next if it fails. Whereas if you do something like exit early, where you say if this is not the case, exit, then suddenly you don't have to remember that for the rest of the code. You don't have to remember which block you're in. Your brain knows, okay, we are now in this context for the entirety of the rest of this procedure or process or function. And it makes it much easier for you to know what the conditions are for this code to run.
Okay.
So both of them can still read like stories, but one of them does meander a little more and causes you to kind of remember, okay, so this value has now been incremented, which means that this time when the loop gets rerun, it's not going to do. And yeah, your brain...
I've lost you already.
Exactly,
yeah.
I've lost myself.
That's all we need, Copilot.
Yes. Let's go with yes.
Yeah.
Look, all of the Gen AI coding tools are getting better.
Yep.
I don't doubt that in a couple of years' time, they're going to be absolutely fantastic. Right now, they are definitely still... The way I see Copilot and its ilk is they're basically an intern that's pair programming with you.
Yes.
Except they're doing the coding, and then you course correct. So as long as there's still a human who is sufficiently knowledgeable about software engineering practices looking at the code that's being produced, it's a great tool. I use it extensively myself.
Yeah, but you still look at it and it's like,
absolutely.
What are you trying to do? Okay, I see what you're doing. That's okay. No, I don't want to do that. Reject.
It's basically a faster way of copying and pasting from Stack Exchange. I'm not sure that's my official stance on it, but it's similar, right?
Yeah, well,
you're copying somebody else's code.
It would have trained off a lot of that data.
It would, and that's fine, because it's getting better at working out which ones are the right answers. But it's still ostensibly getting somebody else or something else to generate code for you, and then how much trust do you put in that? If you put implicit trust in it and you just commit it directly to main, you can have issues.
Yeah.
I still remember asking, very early days, it's much better now, but I remember asking one of the GPTs, write me a function that will return the average of 2 numbers. So it created a function. It was called average of 2 numbers. I thought, it's a good start. It takes A and B as parameters.
Okay.
First line is assign the value of A plus B to, let's call it X. Then it said multiply X by 3, assign that to Y. Divide Y by 2, assign that to Z, return Z.
Okay.
Which is obviously not the average of 2 numbers. So then I said, explain to me what the previous function does. And it said, the previous function returns the average of 2 numbers by taking the values A and B, adding them together, multiplying the result by 3, dividing that result by 2, and returning the average of 2 numbers.
It just reads it out, but it doesn't understand
exactly, because all it is predictive. And it goes on the best that it can, which is its imagination.
Yeah, the one that always got me was you take 2 numbers and you multiply these 2 numbers together.
Yeah.
And
I love that one. That's good too.
It's close, but it's wrong. But it's so close, you think, oh yeah, that's close enough.
Yeah, hallucinating large numbers. It's always good with the small numbers.
Yeah,
because there are examples of those on the internet.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. Cool. Well, this has been fun.
Yeah, thanks.
Yeah,
always good to have a chat.
So thanks, Ben. My name is Matt Wicks from SSW TV. We've had a great time talking about code and deploying code and running applications and All of the
everything
above.
in between.
Yeah. We'll see you later. Have a good time.
Thanks, everyone.